I work as a marketing manager for a mid-sized creative agency in Seattle. My life up until that day was normal, filled with long meetings, strong coffee, and the occasional quiet weekend visit to my father's house by the lake. But everything changed the morning I buried him. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. The rain came down in slow, heavy sheets that morning. Seattle's skies always felt gray, but that day, they seemed to grieve with me. My father, Thomas Bennett, had been gone for only 5 days. The reality hadn't sunk in yet, not even as I stood beside his casket, clutching the umbrella that trembled in my hand. The guests whispered softly, exchanging sad glances and murmurs of respect. But amidst that sea of black coats and somber faces, one person stood out. Elaine, my stepmother. Her expression wasn't grief, it was poise. Cold, calm poise. Dressed in an elegant black dress, pearls gleaming against her throat, she looked like she was attending a gala, not burying her husband. I stayed a few feet away. Partly out of discomfort, partly out of instinct. My relationship with Elaine had never been close. She'd entered my life when I was 17. 2 years after my mother passed away. My father had called her a second chance at happiness. I'd tried to believe him. But even back then, Elaine always treated me like a guest. Polite smiles, controlled tones, and eyes that measured me like a rival. After the service, people gathered in the small reception hall beside the cemetery. I stood near the window, watching the rain blur the marble headstones. When Elaine approached me, her perfume arrived before her voice, sweet and heavy. "Morgan," she said, touching my arm lightly. "We need to talk." Her tone wasn't grief-stricken, it was firm, businesslike. Something in her eyes unsettled me. "What is it?" I asked, my throat tightening. She tilted her head, almost with pity. "It's time you knew the truth. You're not Thomas's real daughter." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. The noise of the rain against the glass seemed to fade. "What did you just say?" I whispered. Elaine's lips curved slightly. "Thomas told me years ago. He wasn't your biological father. Your mother had another man before him." A sharp, dizzying silence filled the room. My chest constricted, and I could barely breathe. People nearby had gone quiet. They'd heard her. Their eyes turned toward me, curious, pitying, judgmental. I shook my head. "You're lying." She shrugged. "Believe what you want, dear. But you'll see soon enough. Especially when the lawyer reads the will." I wanted to scream at her, to demand proof, to call her cruel for saying such a thing at a funeral. But my voice died in my throat. She walked away gracefully, like she just delivered an unpleasant but inevitable truth. I turned to Jake, my father's lawyer and my closest friend since college, who'd witnessed the scene from across the room. His jaw was set, eyes filled with disbelief. "She's bluffing," he said under his breath. "Don't let her get to you." But even as he said it, I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. The kind that mirrored my own heart. What if there was truth in her poison? The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I thanked guests, accepted condolences, and watched Elaine stand proudly beside Sophie, my half-sister, like the queen of grief. And I wondered if everything I'd believed about my father's love had just been shattered by one cruel sentence. That night, when I returned to my apartment, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face, his warm smile, his soft laugh, his voice saying, "You'll always be my girl, Morgan." Now, I wasn't sure what that meant anymore. The following morning, I woke to missed calls. 3 from Jake, 1 from Sophie. My head was pounding from a sleepless night. When I finally called Sophie back, her voice was hesitant. "Morgan, I didn't know Mom was going to say that. Please don't be mad. Don't be mad," I said, pacing the apartment. "She told everyone I wasn't Dad's daughter, at his funeral." Sophie exhaled shakily. I know. She shouldn't have. But she said she just wanted the truth out." "The truth?" I laughed bitterly. "Or her version of it." Sophie didn't answer. And that silence said enough. Jake called next. "We're reading the will this afternoon," he said. "Elaine asked to move it up." "Of course she did," I muttered. "She's probably eager to see what she gets." When I arrived at Bennett and Clark Law, the office my father had worked with for years, Elaine was already there, sitting elegantly across from Jake's desk. Sophie sat beside her, looking uncomfortable. Jake cleared his throat. "We're here to execute Thomas Bennett's final will and testament." Elaine's lips curved faintly. "Let's begin." Jake began reading. Formal legal language, property distributions, donations to charity. Then came the personal section. "To my beloved daughter, Morgan, I leave the lake house in Tacoma, as a reminder of our shared summers and her mother's garden that still grows there." Elaine's face hardened. Jake continued. "To my wife, Elaine, I leave full control of Bennett Enterprises shares, as discussed previously." I was still trying to breathe when Jake paused and added quietly, "Mr. Bennett also included an additional sealed letter addressed to Morgan, marked for her eyes only." Elaine's voice rose sharply. "What letter?" Jake didn't look up. "It's confidential," she scoffed. "This is absurd. Why would he write to someone who isn't even his biological daughter?" Jake's eyes lifted, calm but firm. "Because legally and by every definition that matters, Morgan is his daughter. That was never contested." Elaine stood abruptly. "You'll regret hiding things from me." I held the letter tightly against my chest. Her words burned. But my father's handwriting on that envelope, his familiar loops and steady ink, was all I needed to know something was wrong with her story. Jake placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Read it when you're ready." And for the first time in 2 days, I felt a flicker of strength return. My father was gone, but maybe he'd left behind more than just memories. Maybe he'd left the truth. I sat in my car for nearly an hour before opening the letter. The envelope felt heavier than paper should, as if it carried the weight of my father's voice, waiting to speak one last time. The handwriting on the front was steady, familiar. "To my daughter, Morgan." That word, daughter, was enough to make my throat tighten. When I finally unfolded the letter, his scent faintly lingered on the paper, that mix of cedarwood and old books. "My dear Morgan, if you are reading this, then I am gone. And there are things I never found the courage to say out loud. I know Elaine may try to twist what's left of my truth. But remember this: love makes a family, not blood. You are my child in every way that matters." My vision blurred with tears as I kept reading. "Years ago, when your mother passed away, I lost myself for a while. Elaine entered my life when I was weak. She filled a void. But she never understood you the way your mother did. Over time, I realized she had her own reasons for staying. That's why I began preparing protections. For you. There are documents Jake will help you find if things ever turn ugly. Trust Jake. He's more than my lawyer, he's family. And if you ever doubt who you are, look in the mirror and remember that I chose you. Always." When I reached the end, my tears wouldn't stop. I pressed the paper to my chest and whispered, "I love you too, Dad." The next morning, I met Jake at his office. The early light filtered through the blinds, cutting sharp lines across the desk. I handed him the letter silently. He read it carefully, nodding slowly as his brow furrowed. "This confirms what I suspected," he said. "Your father was worried Elaine might try something after his death. Like claiming I'm not his daughter." Jake nodded. "Exactly. He mentioned protections. He probably meant legal documents or a trust." "So, what do we do?" I asked. He leaned back. "First, we'll check the archives. I'll request your father's confidential files from storage. If he left something behind, it'll be there, that afternoon." I followed Jake into the old record room. A narrow hallway filled with rows of locked cabinets, and the faint scent of dust. As we searched through boxes labeled Bennett Estate, I couldn't help but think about the years Elaine spent in our home, sitting at our dinner table, pretending to care. Finally, Jake pulled out a thin black folder, labeled Private Addendum Morgan. Inside were a series of notarized papers, signed and dated 6 months before my father's death. Jake scanned them quickly, his expression darkening. "He set up a secondary trust," he said. It transfers majority control of Bennett Enterprises to you, not Elaine, but he kept it confidential, maybe because he feared confrontation. I blinked. He gave me his company. Jakey nodded. If this is valid, and it looks airtight, Elaine's about to lose everything she's been scheming for. My pulse quickened. But she swore, I wasn't his real daughter. She's desperate, Jake said firmly. If she convinces people you're illegitimate, she could challenge the will. But your father covered that too. He handed me another document, a paternity acknowledgement, signed and notarized years ago. It stated, in black ink, that Thomas Bennett had legally and willingly recognized me as his daughter. No doubts. No conditions. My eyes filled again, but this time they weren't tears of grief. They were relief. Jake, I said softly, we need to stop her. He smiled faintly. We will. But we'll do it the right way. That evening, I couldn't resist driving to the lake house. The one Dad had left me. The air smelled of pine and rain, the same as it always had. The garden, Mom's garden, was overgrown but alive. I sat on the porch, watching the water shimmer in the fading light, and whispered, you protected me even now, didn't you? As I looked across the lake, I saw headlights in the distance. A car pulling into the driveway. My stomach clenched as Elaine stepped out, wearing a long beige coat and heels, her presence sharp against the calm evening. She walked toward me slowly, her expression unreadable. So, she said, voice low, Jake's been busy. My heart thudded. You followed me. I had to be sure, she said, her smile thin. You really think you can take everything my husband built and hand it to yourself? I stood up. He built it for his family. For me. Her eyes flashed. You're nothing but a mistake he couldn't admit. Something inside me broke. The fear that had been sitting in my chest for days turned into fury. Nuff, Elaine. I have proof. Dad made it official. I'm his daughter in every way that matters, and I'm not going to let you erase that. For the first time, her confident mask cracked. You think that will stop me? She hissed. You have no idea how far I'll go to protect what's mine. She turned abruptly and left, her heels striking the wooden steps like gunshots. I watched her car disappear down the road, my heart pounding. Jake was right, this wasn't over. But now, I had the truth. And I was ready to fight for it. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, calls, and unease. Jake filed a confidential notice with the court to secure my father's secondary trust, while I tried to hold myself together. Each time my phone buzzed, I expected it to be Elaine. But she stayed silent. And that silence felt more dangerous than her words. On the third morning, Jake called. Morgan, I've got something you need to see. It's about your father's accounts. I met him at his office, the same conference room where my world had begun to unravel just a week before. Papers were spread across the table, legal statements, ledgers, old correspondence. Jake handed me a folder marked Bennett Enterprises Internal Affairs. What am I looking at? I asked. Your father started an internal audit 6 months ago, Jake said. He suspected Elaine was moving company funds into a private account overseas. My stomach twisted. She was stealing from him. Looks that way. But he couldn't prove it before he got sick. I flipped through the pages. Scanning bank transfers, shell accounts, and names I didn't recognize. It all connected back to one thing, Elaine's signature. Jake, I said slowly, if this is true, she's not just greedy. She's criminal. He nodded grimly. Exactly. That's why your father created the secondary trust. He knew she'd try to claim everything after he was gone. He wanted to make sure she couldn't. I leaned back, trying to process it all. The pieces were starting to fit together. The sudden coldness in Elaine's voice during his last months, the way she isolated him from old friends, the unexplained business trips. Do you think she could have pushed him? I whispered. Jake's expression darkened. There's no proof of foul play, but I'd say it's worth looking into. My breath caught. For a moment. The room felt too small. That night, I went back to the lake house again. It was late. The kind of quiet that makes the air hum. I walked into my father's study, the same place where he used to read old Hemingway novels and drink scotch. The air still smelled faintly of wood polish and cedar. His desk was neatly arranged, almost untouched since his passing. I ran my fingers along the drawers, remembering how he'd once told me, "A desk holds a man's secrets better than a safe." That memory sent a spark through me. I pulled open every drawer. Pens, files, receipts, until one drawer refused to move. Locked. I crouched down, inspecting the keyhole. The key was nowhere to be found. But I remembered something. My father always kept a spare key, hidden in the bookshelf behind an old copy of The Great Gatsby. I pulled the book out, and sure enough, a small brass key fell to the floor. My pulse raced as I unlocked the drawer. Inside was a single flash drive and a sealed envelope addressed to Jake Clark. "Only if something happens to me." I stared at it, my hands trembling. I called Jake immediately. "You need to come to the lake house. Now." He arrived 20 minutes later, hair slightly disheveled, jacket thrown over his arm. I handed him the envelope. He read it silently, then looked at me. "Your father left me instructions," he said. "If anything happened to him unexpectedly, I was to open this drive and review its contents with you." We plugged it into his laptop. The screen flickered, and a folder appeared titled coincidental. Inside were scanned documents, emails, and bank statements, evidence that Elaine had been siphoning funds for years. But one file stopped me cold: medical authorization. PDF. Jake opened it. My father's digital signature confirmed it was real. It was a change in his medical power of attorney, made only 2 weeks before his death. He had removed Elaine and replaced her with me. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. He knew she couldn't be trusted. He tried to protect himself. Jake nodded. "And now we can prove it." We printed copies of everything: the audit, the authorization, and the offshore account trail. Jake stored the originals in a secure file. "Tomorrow we go to court," he said. "We'll petition to validate the secondary trust and present this as supporting evidence. Once this is official, Elaine can't touch a cent." As he left, I stood in the doorway, staring out at the dark water of the lake. My father's reflection used to shimmer there beside mine. Tonight only the moonlight remained. Then my phone buzzed. "Unknown number. You think you've won. This isn't over." My blood ran cold. The message disappeared seconds later. I called Jake back, but he didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his tone was sharp. "Stay inside, lock your doors. That's not just a threat, Morgan. That's a warning." I hung up and turned the locks one by one. The house creaked softly in the wind. For the first time, the place that once felt like home now felt like a battlefield. I sat on the couch, gripping the letter my father wrote. His words echoed in my mind. "Trust Jake. And if you ever doubt who you are, remember that I chose you." I looked around the dark room and whispered, "I won't let her destroy what you built, Dad. Not anymore." The truth was out there, buried under years of lies. And tomorrow, I would bring it all to light. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The world outside was quiet. Too quiet. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, watching the gray light spill through the window. I hadn't slept at all. Every creak of the house made me think of Elaine's text, of what she might do next. By 8:00 a.m., I was at Bennett and Clark Law. Jake was already there, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired but focused. The evidence we'd found last night was spread across the table like puzzle pieces, waiting to fit. "Elaine won't go down quietly," he said without looking up. "But with what we have, the court can't ignore this." He handed me a folder. Inside were copies of my father's audit reports, the notarized paternity acknowledgement, and proof of the secondary trust. "This," Jake said, "is your armor." I nodded, trying to steady my hands. "Do you think she'll show up?" "Oh, she'll show up," Jake said. "Elaine doesn't run, she fights. And today, she'll try to make you break before we even start." He was right. At 90:15. The heavy glass doors swung open, and Elaine entered like she owned the place. Her posture was perfect, her black coat tailored to precision, her heels echoing against the marble floor. Sophie followed a few steps behind, eyes darting nervously between us. "Good morning," Elaine said, her tone smooth as silk. "I hope we can resolve this nonsense quickly." Jakey didn't stand. "We'll see about that." She smiled. The kind of smile that pretends to be polite but bleeds venom. "I still can't believe Thomas would have left anything to someone who isn't his blood." "Funny," Jake said calmly. "Because he legally recognized Morgan as his daughter. And here's the documentation to prove it." He slid the notarized papers across the table. Elaine barely glanced at them. "Forged," she said flatly. Jake's jaw tightened. "They're registered with the state archives, dated over a decade ago. You can verify them anytime." Her expression faltered, just for a second, before she recovered. "Even so, that doesn't change the fact that Thomas promised me full control of his estate." "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "it changes everything. My father knew what you were doing. He saw through the lies." She turned to me sharply. "Excuse me." Jake pulled another document from the folder, the printed audit report. 6 months before he died, Thomas Bennett initiated an investigation into embezzlement within Bennett Enterprises. The trail leads directly to an offshore account under the name Elaine M. Bennett. The color drained from her face. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Jake asked, opening the laptop and pulling up the flash drive's contents. The screen filled with transaction logs, email chains, and scanned signatures. "Your signature appears here, here, and here, along with digital confirmations from your office." Elaine's composure cracked, her lips tightening. "You have no proof that Thomas didn't approve those transfers." Jake smiled thinly. "Actually, we do." He slid one final document forward. "My father's signed letter of complaint to the Internal Audit Department. He never approved a single one." For the first time she was silent. Sophie spoke up quietly. "Mom, is this true?" Elaine shot her a glare sharp enough to wound. "Don't you start." "Mom." Sophie's voice broke. "Dade trusted you. How could you?" "Enough." Elaine snapped, slamming her hand on the table. "Everything I did for this family." I met her gaze. "No, you did it for yourself. And now everyone knows." For a long, tense moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. Then Elaine leaned back in her chair, the fight in her eyes flickering but not gone. "You think this little display will change anything?" she sneered. "Money and influence don't disappear because of one angry daughter and a sentimental lawyer. I can still contest the will." Jake folded his arms. "You can try, but you'll lose. The secondary trust is protected by multiple clauses your husband signed personally, with witnesses. Contesting it would only expose your fraud to public record." Elaine's mask finally cracked. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her bag. "You've made a mistake, both of you. You'll regret humiliating me." "Humiliation," Jake said quietly, "is earned." She stood abruptly and stormed toward the door, Sophie following behind, tears in her eyes. When the door slammed shut, I finally exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Jake looked at me with a faint smile. "You did well. Kept your cool." "I don't feel cool," I said, my hands shaking. "I feel empty." "That's normal," he said softly. "You've been living in her shadow for years. It takes time to step out of it." I looked at the pile of papers on the table. My father's legacy, my name written beside his, the truth laid bare. "I just want him to be proud," I whispered. Jake nodded. "He already is." We filed the official motion before leaving the office. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying that faint salty air from the bay. The city felt different, lighter, clearer. But deep down, I knew Elaine wasn't finished. Women like her never walked away quietly. As I walked to my car, I saw a figure watching from across the street. A woman in a dark coat, her face hidden beneath sunglasses. When she turned away and disappeared into a waiting car, my chest tightened. Jake came up behind me. You saw her too, didn't you? I nodded slowly. She's not done. He sighed. Then we'll be ready. As we drove off, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, casting a golden light over the city. For the first time, I felt the faint spark of peace, fragile, but real. Still, a whisper lingered in my mind, the echo of Elaine's last words. You'll regret humiliating me. And deep down I knew. The confrontation was far from over. 2 weeks passed after the confrontation at the lawyer's office, yet the tension hadn't loosened its grip. Every morning, I woke expecting a message, a letter, or some public stunt from Elaine. But the silence was worse. Calculated, heavy, almost deliberate. Jake warned me. When people like Elaine go quiet, they're planning something. He was right. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the first move came. I was at the office, halfway through a presentation, when my phone buzzed with a news notification. Businesswoman, Elaine Bennett, under investigation for corporate fraud. My stomach dropped. The accompanying image showed Elaine stepping out of her Mercedes, cameras flashing, her signature calm smile nowhere in sight. Within hours, the internet exploded. Journalists, former employees, and anonymous insiders started sharing fragments of her deception. Fake charities, inflated invoices, falsified contracts, years of greed and manipulation, finally unraveling. Jake called me almost immediately. She's under full federal review, he said, his voice steady. They raided her home this morning. Found files matching the offshore transfers. I was stunned. I didn't think it would happen so fast. That's the thing about justice, Jake replied. It takes its time, then it hits hard. For a moment, I didn't know what to feel. Triumph. Relief. Sadness. Maybe all three. Tangled together. Still, I couldn't celebrate. I knew Elaine wouldn't just surrender. The next evening, as I pulled into my driveway, a black sedan was parked near my gate. The rain had just stopped, and the air smelled of wet asphalt. When I stepped out, someone called my name. It was Sophie. She looked exhausted, hair damp, eyes swollen from crying. Can we talk? She asked quietly. I nodded and led her inside. We sat across from each other in the living room, the soft hum of rain still echoing outside. I didn't know, Morgan, she said finally, about any of it. I thought Mom was just strict, not cruel. I studied her face. The same mix of guilt and fear I used to carry when I was her age. She's your mother, Sophie. You loved her. That's not your fault. She looked down. She says you ruined everything. That dad turned against her because of you. I sighed. Your dad saw what was happening long before I did. He tried to protect both of us. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. I wanted to hate you. I really did. But now I just can't. I see her for who she is. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For years, Elaine had turned Sophie against me, whispering that I was the reason for every problem, every argument. Hearing Sophie's honesty felt like something deep inside me finally healed. She's still my mom, Sophie continued. But I can't defend her anymore. I nodded slowly. You don't have to. Just don't become like her. Sophie wiped her tears and managed a weak smile. You sound like Dad. We both laughed softly. The first real moment of peace between us in years. The next morning, I received another call. This time from a reporter. Ms. Bennett, she said. Would you like to comment on your stepmother's arrest? Arrest. I repeated. She confirmed it. Elaine had been taken into custody. Fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. The list was long. The company she'd built her reputation on was collapsing piece by piece. I turned on the TV. There she was. Hands cuffed. Surrounded by flashing cameras, her face pale but defiant. A strange calm washed over me. I didn't feel joy or vindication. Just quiet acceptance. The storm was ending. Jake called again. It's official. The court froze all her accounts. The secondary trust is now safe. And you've been named the primary beneficiary of your father's personal estate. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, eyes burning with tears I hadn't let myself shed for weeks. He really did protect me, I whispered. Yes, Jake said softly. Even from beyond the grave. 3 days later, I attended the court hearing. Elaine looked smaller somehow. The arrogance gone. Her shoulders hunched, her once perfect hair falling loosely around her face. She refused to look at me as the charges were read aloud. When the judge denied her bail, I expected her to explode, to lash out. Instead, she just stared ahead, eyes glassy and empty. As the guards led her away, she finally turned to me and whispered, "You think you've won. But I made you who you are. Strong, relentless. Don't forget that." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because she was wrong. I wasn't strong because of her. I was strong in spite of her. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones flashing, voices overlapping. I ignored them all and walked straight to my car, where Jake was waiting. "How do you feel?" he asked. I looked up at the sky, clear and blue after weeks of rain. "Free," I said. "And tired," he smiled. "That's what healing feels like." That night, I sat in my father's old study, surrounded by the faint scent of leather and paper. I opened the last letter he ever wrote me. The one Jake had found in his safe. "Morgan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But don't let her shadow take your light. You've always been my greatest pride. Keep your kindness. It's what sets you apart." Tears fell freely this time. Not from pain, but from release. I whispered into the silence, "I did it, Dad. She can't hurt us anymore." The room felt lighter. The grief, the anger, the years of doubt, all slowly melting into something gentler. Justice had finally come full circle. It had been 3 months since Elaine's sentencing. The world had moved on, as it always does. But I still woke up every morning, feeling like I had stepped into a quieter, cleaner version of my life. Her company had collapsed completely, her name erased from the glossy business magazines that once worshipped her. She'd received a 10-year sentence, with no chance of early parole. Jake told me the prosecutors had been ruthless. Every paper trail, every offshore account, every lie meticulously exposed. Sophie, on the other hand, had disappeared from the public eye. She'd left the city, telling me she needed time to find herself. We spoke occasionally, short calls filled with awkward laughter and fragile hope. She was rebuilding in her own way. As for me, I quit my corporate job. After years of chasing marketing targets and boardroom victories, I realized I was done living in cycles of competition. I needed something real, something that honored who I was, and where I came from. So I turned my father's old property on the outskirts of the city into a small creative consultancy. A place where young entrepreneurs could come to learn branding, storytelling, and design without being crushed by the cold machinery of corporate greed. I called it Bennett & Co. But this time, it wasn't just a name. It was a promise to carry my father's integrity forward. One quiet Sunday morning, I walked through the house that had started it all. The one I once feared entering after his funeral. It had taken months to renovate. Repainting the walls, replacing the broken picture frames, restoring the warmth that Elaine had drained from it. In my father's study, sunlight spilled through the tall windows, landing on his old mahogany desk. I placed my coffee beside a leather-bound folder, the last item from his safe that I hadn't opened yet. The folder was marked, "For Morgan, when you're ready." My heart thudded softly as I untied the string. Inside were a series of handwritten notes and a sealed envelope. The first page was in his familiar, looping handwriting. "You once asked me what legacy means. It isn't money, or land, or companies. It's what remains when the noise fades. Your name, your heart, your choices. That's what I want you to protect." Beneath that was a small photograph. Me at 10 years old, sitting on his shoulders at a carnival. We were both laughing, the kind of laugh that only exists in childhood. I held the photo to my chest and smiled through tears. Then I opened the envelope. Inside was a simple letter. My dearest Morgan, if you're reading this, I know things have been difficult. I wish I could shield you from every storm, but strength isn't built in comfort. It's forged in pain, in truth, and in love. You've always been my truth. Elaine may try to rewrite your story, but remember, she can only touch what you give her. Keep your heart closed to hate. Let justice do its work. Then live. Freely, joyfully, without fear. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the final step of freedom. When you find it, you'll understand everything I ever wanted for you. Love always, Dad. I couldn't breathe for a moment. It was as if his voice filled the room again, steady, warm, reassuring. For so long, I'd carried anger like armor, believing that revenge was the only way to heal. But in that moment, I realized he was right. Forgiveness wasn't surrender, it was release. I didn't forgive Elaine for her sake. I did it for mine. That afternoon, I visited the small lake behind the house. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. I carried a small wooden box. The last of my father's ashes, which had been kept in the lawyer's office until now. As I stood by the water, I whispered, "You were right, Dad. It all makes sense now." The wind picked up, carrying the ashes gently across the lake's surface. The sunlight reflected off the ripples like scattered gold. I smiled. For the first time in years, the weight in my chest finally lifted. Later that evening, Jake came by with takeout and 2 glasses of wine. "To new beginnings?" he said, raising his glass. I smiled. "To peace." He looked around the restored study. "You really brought this place back to life. Your dad would have been proud. I think he'd just be happy I stopped hiding." I replied with a laugh. Jake leaned back, his expression soft. "You know you've changed." "I had to," I said. "When everything burns down, you either rebuild, or stay in the ashes." He nodded thoughtfully. "And you rebuilt beautifully." Oh, we toasted again. Quiet laughter filling the space where grief once lived. Before heading to bed, I sat at my desk one last time and wrote in my journal. Something I'd started doing after therapy began. Today I learned that revenge ends when forgiveness begins. I lost my father, but I found myself. I faced betrayal, but discovered truth. And even in the ruins, love was still there, waiting to be found again. I closed the journal, exhaled, and looked out the window. The moonlight shimmered on the lake, calm and endless. Somewhere deep inside, I felt his presence, not as a ghost, but as a quiet certainty. The legacy my father left wasn't in his wealth or his will. It was in me, and I intended to live it fully.